And we're back with another episode of Ask the Lynnwood Cop. I'm Teresa Whipple, and I'm here with Sergeant David Harris. Welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah.
Good to be back.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. And we're going to talk about pedestrian safety because you have an emphasis going on in Lynnwood, actually across the state, you tell me.
Correct.
Now through July 15th, is
Yes.
that right? So talk to me about what you're going to be looking for in this emphasis.
We're trying to focus on pedestrian safety, both with the driver's aspect and also the pedestrians. Primarily, we're going to be looking at pedestrian accidents, crossing the roadways, in mid-block. Sometimes people have a tendency just to say, I need to cross the road, and the crosswalk's 20 feet away from me, so I'm going to go ahead and cross here.
Right.
And unfortunately, our pedestrian accidents, even nationally, are going up. So this is another attempt by the Washington Traffic Safety Commission to try to get some education out there, and the whole goal is to try to reduce accidents. We talked a little bit about last time with vehicular distracted driving. So this focus is more on the pedestrians, about trying to get the people who are walking through our communities to remember that they're not invincible when they're crossing the street. And sometimes folks have a tendency to think that when they step in the road, cars are going to stop for them, and that doesn't always happen.
Right, and of course, one of the things that we talked about earlier was the distraction that goes into play both for drivers and pedestrians, because people are, let's face it, they are texting while they're walking. They're not paying attention. They have headphones on, right? You
Correct.
talked about that. So when you stop somebody, when you notice some of these behaviors, are you giving them a warning? Are you giving them a ticket? What's happening?
Well, it's going to depend on the totality of circumstances, obviously. Sometimes people just have a tendency just to jump out into traffic, and that causes, chaos, as you can imagine. The part of the goal, though, is education, and there's a pamphlet that we're going to be handing out to the folks that we see, giving them some information on pedestrian safety to let them know that, hey, we're out here. We're not trying to go out here and write every person a ticket. It's about education to keep them safe.
Right.
So that's the goal. So we're going to be doing an education part of it. This is part of it, letting people know we're going to be out there, and we also want people to know that we are going to be stopping the pedestrians and talking to them, giving them some information, and the goal is to get them to do that, obviously the willful compliance, so we don't have to go out there and write all these pedestrian tickets. That being said, when you do respond to these pedestrian fatalities, there's a huge ripple effect, because there's the person in the vehicle who struck a pedestrian, obviously that feels terrible that this pedestrian got hurt, and then there's the family of the pedestrian as well. So again, we're trying to get people to do this willful compliance so that, again, we can avoid these tragedies that don't have to happen.
Right, and do you talked about pedestrian fatalities going up. Do you have a sense, or do officials have a sense of why that's happening?
Well, they're looking at a lot of variables on it. Obviously, pedestrians as well have been, under the influence of alcohol and drugs, and sometimes, they lose that, decision-making ability, or a little more risky behavior, and try to dart across the street when they shouldn't. So that's one thing that we're looking at. We're trying to look at lighting conditions. Obviously, sometimes folks crossing streets, obviously wearing dark clothes at night, very difficult for a driver to see. We live in the Pacific Northwest, where most of the year it gets dark fairly early, and then when you have people crossing the roadways, they're difficult to see and pick out, which again is why we encourage the pedestrians to use those crosswalks, because at least in our city in Lynnwood, the crosswalks are illuminated, and drivers have an expectation where that's where a pedestrian may be, not in mid-block, where sometimes our fatalities have occurred are usually in mid-block.
Right, and it seems like from what I remember reading in recent months and years, a lot of those happen on Highway 99, right?
That's
where
correct.
there aren't necessarily crosswalks every so many feet.
Right.
So people do tend to take more risks, I think.
They do. That's very factual, because most of our, actually all of our pedestrian fatalities in the last couple of years have been up on Highway 99. And when you get into later evening hours, it's really not unreasonable for a vehicle to be traveling at 50, 55 miles an hour on Highway 99,
Right.
even though the speed limit's 45. At nighttime, it's not unreasonable. That being said, again, you start talking about time and distance, where a pedestrian could look 600-700 feet down the road, and they think I can make it across the road, and a vehicle traveling at 50 miles an hour, they're going to close that distance very, very rapidly.
Right, yeah, and I think people just are misjudging, as you say, and probably your advice, I'm guessing, would be it's worth taking a few minutes to walk to the nearest crosswalk.
Like I said, if it can save a life or save your own life, and absolutely, that few seconds that you need to walk down that extra 20 feet out of your way to cross, especially a major highway like Highway 99, which is 6 lanes of traffic,
Yeah.
To get across that road safely, whether it's, even if it's an entire minute. I mean, what's a minute in your life? I mean,
Right.
if you could get across the street, so.
Right, okay. And let's talk about one more thing you and I were speaking about before we started rolling the cameras. The role of the legalization of marijuana in the state of Washington and in other places as well has seemed to maybe be playing a role in some of these fatalities, right?
Well, yeah, when this Highway Traffic Safety Commission and NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, is looking at some of the causes for these accidents, one of the interesting things that was discovered was that the states that do have legalized marijuana have seen about a 12 to 13% increase in pedestrian fatalities involving, marijuana.
Okay.
And that could be the pedestrian as well as the driver.
Right.
Those states that have not allowed the use of recreational marijuana have seen a 5% decrease in pedestrian fatalities. So again, why they're not trying to say there's a direct correlation, because we don't know yet,
Yeah.
those are some numbers that we're going to look at and try to say, it's just an interesting number that kind of came up and something for us to take a look at, which again is another reason why we're trying to go out to educate people so that we don't have to have those fatalities within our community.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of a running joke when I've spoken with police officers about this topic. It's like, you tell people not to drink and drive. If it's a pedestrian fatality of somebody who's impaired in some way, don't want them to drive. But on the other hand, walking while you're impaired is not necessarily a good idea either.
Well, you can walk, but like I said, try not to cross
Cross
the
the
middle
street.
of the roadway. I mean, look
Yeah,
for a green
good
light.
point.
Cross, yeah.
Walking is okay, but crossing the
Crossing
street
the
is
street
a
on a
problem.
green light's a
Can
good
be.
thing. Again, it's that risky behavior we
Yeah.
talked about, and that's what happens when people start, having that diminished ability to
Yeah.
to recognize something that's dangerous. And I think a lot of them just don't perceive that this is a threat to me, which is one reason why they do it.
Yeah, very good. Okay, anything we didn't talk about you wanted to address?
No, I think we covered it again. Our goal, overall through the department, our mission is to promote traffic safety for the pedestrians as well as skateboarders and bicyclists and vehicles, is to be safe. And that's what our mission is we're trying to go out there to educate people and try to prevent these tragedies from happening in the first place.
Look for this pedestrian safety emphasis and be aware and be safe, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be back soon with another episode of Ask the Lynnwood Cop.